All right, everybody. UFC 305 just around the corner. We got a heated title fight in the main event. Plus, perhaps the Anik and Florian podcast family victory lap continues today as the great Jon Anik joins us once again to talk about everything happening in the world of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Jon, good to see you. Chihuihui's hat and all. How are you, my man?
Chihuihui's hat, loud and proud. I'm doing well, buddy. It's always good to chop it up with you in advance of a pay-per-view. Congratulations to the new undisputed UFC welterweight champion, Belal Muhammad. Your beard looks great. Little salt there. When we started doing these conversations, there was no white to be had in your beard.
Yes, a little salt and pepper going on. And, I've come to just live with it. And I like it.
Looks good. I mean, I'm paying you a compliment,
I appreciate that. Appreciate that. It's good to see you, my man. And as you mentioned, Belal Muhammad did it. He's the welterweight champion of the world. He goes and beats Leon Edwards. There's very little doubt, very little danger outside of sort of getting split open at the end of the fight. The man freaking did it, Jon. Your twin brother must be on cloud nine. Belal Muhammad shut up a lot of people at UFC 304, did he not?
Just incredible. And not unlike Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics, who had all of this pressure on them all of last NBA season. And really kind of when your opportunity presents itself, you get one shot. Yes, their core, the Celtics core, is still intact. But for Belal Muhammad, he was getting one crack at this. And he's always been a guy, I think, who has led the league in self-belief. But I just can't believe the savagery with which he is able to approach these highly tense competitive environments, especially this one. I had wondered aloud whether or not he was going to be able to properly compartmentalize everything that he was fighting for in terms of his Palestinian people and the Palestinian Americans and the city of Chicago and everything else, right? And now, right, his unbeaten streak is put in the proper context, right? This is a guy who was never going to sniff the pound for pound list unless he won the world championship. And he had one shot to do it. There have been others who have had multiple opportunities and have not come through. So congratulations to him. This fight obviously has things for him to work on, right? Leon Edwards was the grappler who was actually able to get reversals in these rounds, so I think that's something that Belal can look at. But he's excited, I can tell you, as one of his dear friends, to take on all of these potential challengers, Shavkat Rakhmonov and everybody else.
I wanted to ask you about this. I want to touch on the next opponent in a second because there's been a bit of a context around this conversation that has driven me up the wall, and I wanted to run it by you. But after Belal wins the belt, you go on Twitter and you take a bit of a victory lap and you're paying homage to Belal and his win. But what stood out to me through all of this was, and this happens in MMA all the time, as you are well aware of, fans just start clapping back at you saying that you weren't calling the fight right down the middle. And outside of Michael Bisping's questionable scorecard at the end of the fight, I didn't hear anything super egregious or weird, although I know you disagree with it, but I'm sure the perfectionist in you, the level you strive to be at every event, you probably did go back and rewatch it to check just in case to see what people are talking about. So after going through that, what's your response to anybody who feels like you were flirting with that line at all?
No, I mean, I have interpersonal relationships on both sides of this, right? I mean, I actually go further back with Leon than I do with Belal. Tim Simpson, his manager, is a good friend of mine. And historically for me, the call that has, I think, helped my career the most was something that relates to Leon Edwards. If you listen to the Anik and Florian podcast, our show open ends with Leon Edwards saying headshot dead, right? So there's a lot of connective tissue and interpersonal stuff for me on both sides of all of these fights. But yeah, I felt like the call was down the line. I got an Instagram message from Oban Elliott yesterday, and it read, the beginning of it, "Hey, I just watched my fight back." And that's all I could see in that moment in time before I opened the message. And every time that happens, I'm certainly hoping that they say, "Man, thanks for the prep and the praise and everything else," as opposed to like, "I'm a BJJ black belt, not brown, and I felt like you gave the other guy too much credit." Now, you can imagine all the different things that commentators hear from fans and fighters and coaches and bosses over the years. But I sleep well at night. I stand by that call, and I stand by Belal Muhammad as a friend. When we launched his podcast with my twin brother 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, he had 18,000 Instagram followers. He was unranked. We believed in him in terms of him having a social media presence and that he could maybe become a contender, if not championship athlete. And you know what? We bet on the right fucking guy. And if I got married a second time, he might be a fucking groomsman. So I can't help that I have friendships that I have developed in this sport. But you can be sure I'm not as close with Belal as I am with Dominic Cruz. And once any of these guys hit the tunnel, or hit the inspection zone, last thing I'm thinking about is their mothers and their brothers and the interpersonal stuff. So it is what it is. It comes with the territory, and people who don't want to credit this win in this historically great division by Belal Muhammad, cry.
Well said. Well said. By the way, I picked against Belal, but I did have a bet on Belal. I took the points.
I didn't like him in the fight.
No
Can I
brainer.
say that now? Does that sound objective? I
Yes,
still
please.
believe Leon Edwards is the toughest matchup for him in the welterweight division. And Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Machado Gary and Sean Brady and others are right there. This was a big result for Sean Brady, who I think is cannonball coming in his own right if he can get past Gilbert Durinho Burns. But I still think Leon's the toughest matchup for Belal. And even though promotionally they don't want to go in the direction of a trilogy and an immediate run back of that title fight between Belal Muhammad and Leon Edwards, I have an appetite for it. And I actually believe Leon, if not some long reigning champion, probably deserves it, you know? And if Shavkat's not ready, or Usman's not ready, or another guy I'm not thinking of is not ready, I can assure you Leon would shorten up a training camp to, as he says, try to get this back in blood.
Yeah, because there is a lot of chatter on who Belal should fight next. And to me, and a lot of others, it is Shavkat Rakhmonov. It's just not a question in my mind. He's the boogeyman of the division. But there are people who say, and you mentioned his name, you know what, just give it to Kamaru Usman. And John, while I respect Usman a ton, and I cannot ignore the title run he was on and what he did for this division, the man has lost 3 in a row. And regardless of who he's lost to, how he lost, the circumstances around it, his ink that signed the contract is the same ink anybody else on any sort of notice signs any other contract. Unless you're Conor McGregor, I just don't see how you can give a title fight to a guy who has lost 3 straight fights. Get a win over anybody in the top 15. You beat a Ian Gary or a Jack Della Maddalena or even a Wonderboy Thompson. Like, you do that, sure, we could talk title fight. But I think it's Shavkat in the driver's seat, and there should be no other option currently, unless Belal's going to take some time off and you want to do Shavkat versus Usman to determine who the guy is. Am I crazy for just saying, come on, man, we can't do this right now. Let's just give it to Shavkat. He's on the run. He's the bulldozer. And Usman's lost 3 in a row. No disrespect to the man.
Yeah, there's a lot of tricky things that go into matchmaking. Israel Adesanya, coming off a loss, is fighting Dricus du Plessis for the middleweight championship at UFC 305. And I'm not sure there's ever been a guy coming off a loss who seems more worthy of going in there and fighting for the title. Now, I have screamed from the rooftops for Sean Strickland's candidacy, but I don't bat an eye that Izzy's getting this championship opportunity based upon everything that he has done. But yes, for Usman, it is 3 successive losses, even though he has maintained, I believe, #1 contendership in the welterweight division through some of that. So yes, in a meritocracy, Michael, there is no argument really for my good friend, the Nigerian nightmare, Kamaru Usman, when you have the undefeated Shavkat Rakhmonov, when you have Ian Machado Gary with whatever number next to his name, when you have a, in theory, healthy Jack Della Maddalena, and then above all else, you have a champion. Remember the name, Belal Muhammad, who wants to fight all these guys and right away. That's the thing. You can be sure, however short the conversation was between Dana White and Belal Muhammad after this victory in Manchester, England, Belal probably said, just so you know, I'm going to be a champion for as long as I reign that gets back on the horse. And if you need me, Madison Square Garden in November against Shavkat Rakhmonov or anybody else, let's do it. That's about as early as I could come back, but let's do it. So, as you can see, I'm excited about the welterweight division. I do believe Rakhmonov will be the next guy, and I don't think many people would be surprised if it's a co-headliner in Madison Square Garden or even in December.
Well, I mean, look, I don't blame Usman for taking a shot. I don't blame Belal for taking his either. I really don't. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I was getting in arguments with people about this, and someone was telling me, "Oh, if they do Belal versus Shavkat, it's 2 guys who don't have top 5 wins at all." I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, Belal just beat the champion, and he beat Gilbert Burns, who is ranked #5, to get the title shot. Like, what are you talking about?
So let me ask you this, and maybe somebody at MMA Fighting knows the answer. I don't know if Belal's next fight is going to be a main event, right? A lot of that's going to depend on the other champions, right? But what is a bigger moneymaker? Belal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, or Belal Muhammad versus the future Hall of Famer Kamaru Usman. Now, Usman has moved some pay-per-view needles, right? Even though Jorge Masvidal maybe gets 51% of the credit for that big pay-per-view that those guys did, if the promotion believes that Muhammad Usman is a bigger fight and maybe they slide Usman in and try to delay Shavkat or sit him out. Who knows what the relative health is for Kamaru Usman with his knees, and Shavkat Rakhmonov, is he healthy, right? I don't know these answers, but in a meritocracy, I think I speak for the fan base and you when I say that it's going to be Muhammad and Rakhmonov. And I think Belal, unless he said otherwise, is of that mindset right now.
Yeah. And either fight is fine. But I also think Usman, if Usman fights Ian Machado Gary, and beats him, and then they decide, like, and Shavkat, Belal haven't fought yet, and then Usman wins that fight, I kind of think the answer is probably Usman then. If we're talking about what's the clear bigger fight, what the appetite is looking more towards, but just right this second, I don't know.
And I just think, last thing I'll say in a short way, I think it's hard to make an Usman over Leon Edwards argument as well.
I agree. Completely agree. I talked about that this morning on my other show, but let's fast forward to UFC 305. We finally get the fight, Jon Anik. Didn't get it the way we thought we might get it originally with DDP chasing Israel Adesanya. Now we get the reverse. DDP is the champion. Israel Adesanya coming back after the longest layoff in well over a decade. Seems to have a very focused mindset. Looks a little more yoked up in terms of his strength and conditioning. Izzy's looks like he's spent the time off wisely. A lot at play here besides these two guys simply not liking each other, Jon Anik. You got to be excited for this one.
Oh, I can't wait, right? If I got to go from South Florida to Perth, Western Australia, 37 hours from door to door, if you really want to know. Thankfully, it's for a main event of this magnitude. Did you see that stare down like 6 weeks ago between these two in Perth, bro? It's still going on. I mean, it was the longest stare down in UFC history, I think, other than Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka in the actual octagon. Just an incredible backdrop to this main event. And yeah, I mean, Izzy's not the type of beast that I would want to awaken or add sort of extra fuel to. But at this level, I feel like these guys competitively make for a fascinating stylistic matchup, and they'll bury the hatchet, not unlike Manel Kape and Mohamed Mokaev after the fact. Perhaps I will be wrong in that. And I see you smirk a little bit there. Perhaps the nature of the result, if there's a knockout, maybe there's some extra friction here. But I think it's just two guys who have a lot of pride in where they're from and who they are, and two guys who just aren't going to back down. The biggest difference, I think, between me and my twin brother is that I don't seek confrontation, but I'm confrontational and he is much less so. And I think these guys are a little bit confrontational, and they're going to confront each other very far from where I am right now. We got Wheels Up on Monday, and it's just crazy because Kenny Florian, former 3-time UFC title challenger who I do the podcast with, we went back and watched both of their respective UFC debuts this week for UFC Fight Pass. And it's interesting when it comes to this now South African UFC middleweight champion, Dricus du Plessis, and everything that is said about his style and the relative recklessness and the reckless abandon that maybe some perceive that actually is high fight IQ. And even when he was chasing this knockout against Marcus Perez in his UFC debut 4 years ago, his shell was tight, his guard was high. Yeah, I mean, his footwork isn't Dominic Cruz in motion, right? He isn't, wowing you with grace per se. But even 4 years ago, you could see why he realized success. So I don't know. It's the brute versus the finesse, but it's so much more than that. I believe it or not, I can't wait to get to WA.
It's got to be a hell of a fight. What's the biggest question you have in this fight? I feel like most of the questions are coming from the Izzy side with the layoff. Is the hunger still there? Is the size going to make a difference in the fight? And then DDP, it's the climb is always fruitful, but once you get there, is the motivation still there? We haven't seen a title defense yet. I don't really question that with a guy like DDP, but when you're getting ready to prepare to call this fight, what's the biggest question you have about it?
Well, I'm curious the extent to which Izzy is going to not throw caution to the wind, but sort of manage risk and manage aggression, because he is maybe the best striker that I have ever seen in there. And a lot of people like this matchup for him. He is the betting favorite right now, increasingly so. In those latter rounds, how is he going to manage risk, if the bull continues to just come at him? That's a big question mark for me. I think Adesanya is going to be in prime form. I just think that this is a guy you really have to separate from consciousness. And I think if anybody's capable of doing that, it's Izzy. But I think Izzy's going to be of fine fettle, as the Brits say, and not just when it comes to the strength and conditioning. I don't have really any questions on the South African side. Certainly, he's dealt with some injuries. I'm glad that he did not rush himself into this Izzy title defense, because I think this is a guy that you want ample time to prepare for. But even though every champion, to Teddy Atlas's point, doesn't level up 20 to 30% once they become the champion, I think Leon Edwards, that applies to. Du Plessis, with all the wealth of championship experience he had pre-UFC, I'm not sure there's some 25% level up, but he just does everything right, seemingly. He's a picture of focus, and I'm excited to sit down with these men and see where they're at, man. Not too many questions, though, for me. I think you're getting two guys at their peak.
One of the big questions I have is what comes after this, because I talked to Eric Nixick the other day, obviously with the Francis news, but I asked him about Sean Strickland, because Sean, being the business savvy version of himself, is it's just so different than the guy that we've seen over the years, who is like, yeah, 4 days notice, I'll fight him, I don't care. But once you taste gold and you want to get it back, and it just tastes so good that you can't wait to get it again, sometimes you have to take calculated risk. He's doing that right now. However, 2 months from now, we're getting Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev again, at least on paper as it stands. That's a huge fight. So do we have to wait until October 27th to even have this conversation about who's next? Or do you feel like, because you've been, like you said earlier, you've been on the rooftop saying Sean Strickland should be the next guy. Is it Sean for you? Or do you feel like it's really going to hinge on what happens with Bobby Knuckles and Khamzat Chimaev?
I know people don't want to believe this, but if Shavkat Rakhmonov, in fact, had cut the line and fought Leon Edwards at UFC 300 because they needed that to be the main event, right? Belal Muhammad was still going to fight for the championship. It just might have been a 20-month wait. So I even said to Sean Strickland before the Paulo Costa fight, like, bro, you win this fight, or you might have to stare at 18 months on the sidelines. Now, I think for Sean, when you have thrice stepped up for the UFC, there's nothing left to do, right? I mean, I can trot out what I've said in the past, bro. Like, he put his number 4 ranking on the line against Alex Pereira during International Fight Week in 2022. He has stepped into main events against guys like Nassourdini Mavov and Abus Magomedov, and then fought Paulo Costa over 5 rounds to help drive a pay-per-view that needed his presence. There's nothing left for Sean Strickland to do, and if that means he has to wait for a victorious Robert Whittaker or Khamzat Chimaev to fight the winner of Du Plessis and Adesanya, then so be it. It is tricky in some of these divisions, brother. 85 and 55, and I think even 70, right? To some extent. We have the flyweight division right now where, to me, Steve Urseg's the guy, but he's fighting Kai Kara France. Alexandre Pantoja is without an obvious guy. And in some of these other divisions, we got 5 or 6 number 1 contender types. Sean needs to wait.
Yeah, I think he should. And then to see a world without a Sean Strickland fight over 18 months is just a world I never expected to live in, John. I agree with what he's doing, by the way.
Maybe a backup scenario where you're going to fight for the championship. You never know if there could be a reason for an interim title. Stranger things have happened than, I'm not even going to say it, but you just don't know. We could have an interim middleweight championship in 5 months. You just don't know. But I would think anybody managerially who is advising Sean Strickland, you beat Paulo Costa in a fight that you didn't necessarily need to take when the boss thinks you defended your title against Dricus du Plessis. All right, let's take the Paulo Costa fight. Well, you won that going away. I mean, what are you going to fight Robert Whittaker now? That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense if you're really trying to, get to that level of financial freedom and become the champion again. I mean, the Whittaker fight to me is too risky if it's not for a piece of gold.
Yeah. And that's sort of how Eric believes this scenario plays out as well. You mentioned Steve Urseg, who we call Vinny Siggs, taking on Kai Kara France. We got Tai Tuivasa, Jairzinho Rosenstrike. The Leech is back. Li Jingliang versus Carlos Prates. And we got Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker opening up the main card as of right now. So of those final 4 fights of this main card, the first 4 fights of the main card, most to gain, most to lose in your mind?
Most to gain, most to lose. All right. So I am sitting here looking at the second draft of the fight card internally, and my bout order is different than yours. So we'll see how it all plays out. Most to gain, I wish it was Li Jingliang, right? He has had sort of this devastating neck injury, and I'm so thankful we have the Leech back for the first time since 2022, because not only was he sort of relevant in and out of the octagon and gaining fans by the minute, right? But he was looking like a fighter who could become a champion for China on the men's side, and I know we have a lot of Asian athletes doing a lot of big things right now. I'm happy to see the Leech back, but I don't know that he has the most to gain necessarily. I think Dan Hooker might have the most to gain as I sit here looking at him plus 220 or so against Mateusz Gamrot. You talk about boogeymen. A lot of people think Gamrot qualifies at 155, and Dan Hooker has wanted this fight. And Dan Hooker's just an absolute savage. And Mateusz Gamrot's another guy who could be fighting for the belt right now. So I love that fight. I think Dan Hooker obviously has a lot to gain to sort of vault into the top 5 there. Kai Kara-France has a ton to gain. I think Steve Erceg has a decent amount to lose in this spot, because when I got finished calling his fight against Alexandre Pantoja, I thought he won. And as I said earlier, without an obvious number 1 flyweight contender, I would have liked to see them run those two back. And he's taking a very risky fight here against Kai Kara-France. So I think Steve Erceg has a lot to lose, but a lot to gain as well, because I think Erceg is now 1 win away, given sort of some of the murky nature of the flyweight division. Heavyweight fight is sort of interesting. If you're only as good as your last fight, I think Jairzinho Rozenstruik was in a very good place. Tai Tuivasa, man, a lot of ebb and flow to his career. I think I will extract a lot from our fighter meeting, but I hope Ty's in a pretty good place. And I understand why an athlete like that, plus 170 or so in this matchup, the faster guy, I can see why some people like this matchup for Ty. And I think there's something for him to gain next weekend as well.
Yeah, very solid main card. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Then we got head on into Noche UFC 306 with Sean O'Malley, Merab Dvalishvili. We got Alexa Grasso, Valentina Shevchenko 3. That card's just going to be fun as hell. Have you been in the Sphere yet? Have you been inside there?
No, I don't want to walk foot in there until rehearsal or when I actually have to go in there. In a perfect world, I won't go in there until Saturday, but I would imagine I might have some obligation. I don't know if any weigh-in is happening there. I really don't know exactly what is happening, other than the fact that seemingly this show has 5 times the budget of a Conor McGregor pay-per-view, and I'm very honored and excited to call it. And hopefully I will be healthy on September 14th to do just that. But I can't wait. But bro, UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi. Are you serious? I mean, is this not sort of like days of old with a pay-per-view? Like, bro, there's 6 main events. And the 6th one, right? The worst one, I guess, right? If you really want to use a bad adjective for it, is fucking Dan Ige and Lerone Murphy. That's your 6th main event at UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi. So yes, I'm excited about 305, 6, 7, but 308 is just insane on paper, and I hope it stays together, right? Alexander Rakic and Magomed Ankalaev, bro. Ankalaev's your boy. Come on.
Dude. Yeah, I'm stunned that fight's happening. I just want to see him fight Alex Pereira at this point. Like, we're there. Like, we've run through Jamal Hill. We've done the Yuri thing. What are we doing?
Yeah,
here,
I don't know.
Is there something? Are they cooking something up that we're just not seeing right now?
I don't know. I too am surprised. I was in Saudi Arabia. Ankalaev was there. He looked to be in fine fettle, and I was surprised that he didn't get a championship fight, because Rakic is a big bad boy.
Sure is. He sure is. As good as 308 looks right now. And we were trying to all sort of have conversations over the last couple months of like how we would map out the rest of the year. And it seemed by most accounts, although it's never made official until the big boss goes on social media and announces it, it seemed like we were going to do Topuria Holloway on the October 5th card, 307, because we assumed Islam Makhachev would fight Arman Tsarukyan at 308. That would be the main event, and we'd build the card upon that. Yeah. Now we've had to call an audible. We got Topuria Holloway, which just absolutely rules, headlining in Abu Dhabi. And that kind of leaves a hole on October 5th for UFC 307, which is officially announced for Salt Lake City. By all accounts, we're going to get Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena. Yet it's not official, but it seems like that's the direction we're going. I just don't know if that is going to be the main event of that card. So what do they do here? You think they go there? I mean, Sarukyan's not talking about, hey, maybe I'll go fight for an interim belt against Poirier or this guy or that guy. Yeah. What's Pereira doing right now? I mean, there's not a ton of options right now, but the UFC is so good at like pulling a out of nowhere rabbit out of their hat to fill that spot. So what do you think? Because the rest of the card looks really good. We got Jose Aldo back, Kayla Harrison, etc. What do you think we're gonna somewhat do here? Because I don't know.
Well, it's funny because you say, what are they going to do? And it's like, bro, I work for them, and yeah, they always have a rabbit in the hat, but I really don't know. Is it totally out of the realm of possibility that we see Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler in Salt Lake City in 7 or 8 weeks? I think you would maybe want to let that build or maybe have a Las Vegas backdrop, but I don't know. I think a lot of people will be looking to social media to see if Michael Chandler ends up in South Florida, right? So I think that would be an outside possibility that is just maybe front of mind right now. But, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but, there was no way Belal Muhammad, right? He hasn't even been able to emote yet, right? Like he hasn't even been able to let this win sink in, right? My twin brother asked him yesterday if the win has sunken in yet, and it has not. Emotionally, I think for a lot of his friends and family and supporters, it has. And maybe when he has the parade in Illinois, it will. But I think the stitches are out of the nose, and I think managerially, Ali Abdelaziz was maybe saying, Shavkat, Salt Lake City, take him into deep waters at altitude. Belal can't fight in Abu Dhabi. Everybody on Team Muhammad would love to see him defend the title in Abu Dhabi. Madison Square Garden's the earliest that man's going to be able to come back, and that would probably be pushing it. So if Islam Makhachev is on the mend and your welterweight champion just won the belt, who knows? UFC 305 could end quickly. It could not. I really don't know. But I don't have any great answer for you. I would maybe say 5 to 10% chance you see McGregor and Chandler in Salt Lake City. And that is not informed speculation. That's just the fan in me wondering a lot.
Yeah, could happen. But again, the UFC likes to pull this rabbit out of the hat. Last thing on this, because you mentioned you've been saying Sean Strickland is very smart here, just waiting, right? Just wait for your shot unless there's something attached to it.
Yeah.
Should Arman Tsarukyan wait for Islam Makhachev? I mean, he's saying in interviews that maybe December, maybe early 2025, but sometimes you just have that itch. You just got to scratch, John. You got to get in there and fight. And who knows, you might get some pay-per-view points out of the deal. Who the hell knows at this point? I'm not in Arman's head, but should he wait for Islam or should he take that risk and fight somebody else?
No, he should wait. When Alexandre Pantoja won whatever fight it was at UFC 277, I think, that set up his championship opportunity, and I bring it up because Pahumpa's the same head coach, they knew they were going to have to potentially wait a long time, and I think they waited a year or so, did Pantoja. Tsarukyan's got to wait. I mean, dude, do you think Belal Muhammad, the way he's wired, I hate to keep invoking his name. I don't. I actually love it, but 15 months, bro. Like, you think he wanted to wait a competitor like that 15, 16 months? But he knew that if he fought Gilbert Burns on one leg on 3 weeks' notice and beat him, that he was staring at maybe a year and a half on the sidelines. Arman Tsarukyan has to wait. Other thing maybe is they would do a BMF belt with a couple of big names in a different division, a bigger division, right? 70 or 85. And maybe you throw Strickland a bone or something like that. I don't know. Salt Lake City got a BMF main event at UFC 291. So I don't know that you would do that again there, but I don't know. I'm just taking the questions as they come in here on MMA Fighting. That's really all we're doing.
That's what we do. MSG, we got our first fight for MSG, John. Did you see that? The
No.
All-American Chris Weidman coming back to New York. He's going to fight your boy, Eric Anders. What do you think of that?
Right.
First one on the books.
I think that fight makes a lot of sense. Chris Weidman is just one of my favorite human beings, and I'm just so inspired by this comeback, and not just coming back, but getting that goddamn green stripe on his Wikipedia page after that devastating leg break, because if you don't think Conor McGregor wants that one UFC scalp in the worst effing way, that's all he wants. And Eric Anders has talked a lot about, being around his kids as they sort of go into high school. So I think he's going to try to produce a big moment, in one of his last several fights here as well. So, we'll be there, with my Celtics backpack being a dickhead at Madison Square Garden here in a couple months.
Yep. I usually wear my Red Sox hat on the plane and all throughout New York, and no one says a word, John. Maybe it's the salt and pepper beard. Maybe they're just inspired by that. I don't really know, but appreciate you as always, my man. You got a busy weekend ahead to get ready to fly out to Perth, Western Australia. It's a long ass flight, man. But again, you're going to see DDP versus Izzy. It's a damn good one to fly 37 hours for. Appreciate you as always, my man. And all the best to you on set. By the way, I don't know if you could reveal this information. It is an international card. I assume the one and only Daniel Cormier will be there. Do we know who broadcaster number 3 is going to be yet?
Yes, we do. Would you like me to reveal that right here, right now?
If you can.
Dominic,
or you can hit me up after.
Cruz.
Oh,
yep, the Dominator. And clear intention guy, one of my best friends in the space, as you know. He'll give me straight answers on everything except whether he has a fight on the books or he's been offered one. So, but yes, Dominic Cruz will be on the sticks with us in Perth.
JA and a pair of DCs, UFC 305. Don't miss it, everybody. Jon, you're the man. Thank you again.
Thank you, buddy. Always a pleasure.